In the summer of 1945, 900 men entered the water. They were alive. The United States Navy knew exactly where they were. They had intercepted the message. They knew the USS Indianapolis had been struck, and they did nothing. For nearly 5 days and nights, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 900 sailors fought thirst, madness, and one of the most relentless predators the natural world has ever produced. And when 316 men were finally pulled from the water, barely breathing, eyes burned hollow by the sun, the United States Navy did something extraordinary. They blamed the captain. This is the true story of the USS Indianapolis, and it is darker than any Hollywood film has ever dared to show you. July 1945. The war in the Pacific is almost over, but no one knows that yet. In San Francisco Harbor, a heavy cruiser is being loaded under conditions of extreme secrecy. Armed guards stand at every entrance. The cargo is transferred in the middle of the night. No manifest is created. No record is kept. The USS Indianapolis, one of the most decorated warships in the U.S. Pacific Fleet, is carrying the most dangerous object ever built by human hands. The core components of the world's first atomic bomb, destined for Hiroshima. The ship's captain, Charles McVay III, is not told what the cargo is. The sailors below deck are not told either. They are given one instruction only: deliver this to the island of Tinian in the northern Mariana Islands, and do it faster than any ship has traveled that route before. They crossed the Pacific in record time, 10 days. On July 26, 1945, the Indianapolis docked at Tinian and unloaded its cargo. Within 2 weeks, that cargo would kill more than 70,000 people in an instant. The men of the Indianapolis did not know that. They were already sailing again, this time toward Leyte Gulf in the Philippines, where they were to meet the USS Idaho and prepare for the planned invasion of Japan. They were sailing without an escort, a ship carrying 1,195 men, traveling through contested waters, alone. Captain McVay had received intelligence reports. Japanese submarine activity in the region was high. The route ahead had seen recent attacks. He requested an escort. He was denied. He also received no warning about the submarines directly ahead. On the evening of July 29, 1945, the men of the Indianapolis played cards. They read books. Some spoke with the ship's chaplain. The ocean was calm. The stars were out. It was the last peaceful night any of them would ever have. At precisely 0:15 on July 30, 1945, Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, captain of Japanese submarine Thorn 58, gave the order to fire. 2 torpedoes sliced through the black water. The first struck the starboard bow. It tore it completely off. A tank containing 3,500 gallons of aviation fuel ignited in a pillar of fire visible for miles. Sailors were thrown from their bunks. Some were killed instantly. Others ran blindly through burning corridors, unable to see, unable to breathe. Before anyone could react, the second torpedo hit. It struck near midship, directly into a fuel tank and a powder magazine. The explosion didn't damage the ship. It split her nearly in two. The Indianapolis, a 610-foot-long heavy cruiser, was now sinking at 17 knots, moving so fast that water poured through every breach, every shattered hull plate, every wound torn open in her body. She went down in 12 minutes. 12 minutes. For a ship that size, that is almost incomprehensible. Around 300 men went down with her, trapped below deck, killed by the explosion. 2 injured to swim. Around 900 men made it into the water, alive. For now. Life rafts were scarce. There were nowhere near enough for 900 people. Many men had no life jacket. In the chaos of those 12 minutes, there was no orderly evacuation. There was only darkness, fire, screaming, and the sea rushing upward to meet them. As the last lights of the Indianapolis disappeared beneath the surface, the men found themselves utterly alone. No radio signal got through in time. No confirmed distress call was received. And no one was coming. As the sun rose on July 30th, the survivors began to understand their situation. No land, no ships, no horizon that offered anything but more ocean. The ship's chief medical officer, Dr. Lewis Haynes, later recalled, "There was nothing I could do but give advice, bury the dead, save the life jackets, and try to keep the men from drinking the salt water." But some did drink. When thirst becomes unbearable, truly unbearable, the mind breaks before the body. Sailors who drank the seawater became delirious within hours. Their tongues swelled, they foamed at the mouth. They saw things that weren't there, and they dragged others down with them as they went. Then the sharks arrived, drawn by the sound of the explosions, by the blood, by the thrashing of hundreds of desperate men, oceanic white-tip sharks, tiger sharks, species among the most aggressive in the open ocean. Survivor Lowell Dean Cox later said, "Every now and then, like lightning, one would come straight up and take a sailor, take him straight down. One came up and took the sailor next to me. It was just somebody screaming, and then silence." Ensign Harlan Twible, the only officer in a group of 325 survivors, organized something he called shark watches. He had men kick and beat at the water constantly. He forced the group to stay together, because every man who drifted away alone was, most likely, never coming back. He also made a decision that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He ordered the dead to be cut loose, pushed away from the group, out to sea. Because if you leave a body in the group, the sharks follow the blood, and men who are still alive don't need to watch what comes next. Day 2. Day 3. By day 4, men were no longer dying primarily from shark attacks. They were dying of something far slower: dehydration, exposure, salt poisoning, exhaustion, and the complete collapse of hope. Meanwhile, back across the Pacific, the United States Navy had received a message. Japanese submarine I-58 had transmitted a signal, confirming it had sunk an American battleship along the Indianapolis's known route. Naval intelligence intercepted it and dismissed it as a decoy, a trick designed to lure rescue ships into an ambush. The Indianapolis did not arrive at Leyte Gulf on schedule. No one reported it missing. The Navy later explained this with a protocol that is difficult to comprehend even today. Ships on combat duty were not tracked upon arrival. If they didn't show up, it was assumed their orders had changed. The non-arrival of a vessel carrying 1,195 men in a known submarine zone generated no alarm, no search, no inquiry, for nearly 5 days. On the morning of August 2nd, by pure accident, a Navy patrol aircraft on a routine anti-submarine run happened to fly over the area. Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn saw something below. He thought it was an oil slick. Then he realized it was men, hundreds of men. He radioed immediately. Within hours, Lieutenant Adrian Marks arrived in a PBY seaplane. He dropped rafts and supplies from the air. Then he looked down and saw a man being dragged under by a shark. Marks disobeyed his orders. He landed his seaplane in open, shark-infested ocean, something a PBY was not designed to do. He pulled survivors onto the wings until the aircraft physically could not hold any more weight. Just after midnight on August 3rd, the USS Cecil J. Doyle arrived and pulled the last men from the water. Of the 1,195 men who had sailed, 316 survived. The Navy faced a choice. They could acknowledge that a series of institutional failures, ignored warnings, a denied escort, and nearly 5 days of silence while 900 men floated in shark-infested water had cost hundreds of lives unnecessarily. Or they could find someone to blame. They chose the second option. Captain Charles McVay III, who had himself survived the sinking, who had organized survivors in the open ocean, was court-martialed. The charge: failing to zigzag. The Navy's argument was that McVay should have steered his ship in a zigzag pattern to evade submarine attacks, a tactic that could, in theory, make targeting more difficult for an enemy. McVay's defense was straightforward. His orders gave him discretion based on visibility conditions. The night of the attack, the sky was overcast. He judged the tactic unnecessary. But here is the detail that the American public, when they later discovered it, found almost impossible to process. To testify against McVay at his court-martial, the United States Navy brought in Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, the Japanese submarine captain who had fired the torpedoes, and Hashimoto testified, under oath as a witness for the prosecution, that it would not have mattered, that at the range and visibility conditions on the night of July 30th, 1945, zigzagging would have made no difference whatsoever. The Indianapolis would have been sunk regardless. The Navy convicted McVay anyway. He is the only captain in the entire history of the United States Navy ever court-martialed for losing a ship sunk by an enemy in an act of war. McVay received a reprimand. He was allowed to continue serving. He eventually retired as a rear admiral. But the conviction never left him. For years, for decades, after the war, the letters came. Hundreds of them, from families of men who had died, from people who had read articles, from people who had seen films. The letters called him a murderer, a coward, a man with blood on his hands. Some were written by children who had been told their fathers died because of him. In 1968, at the age of 70, Charles McVay walked out to his front yard in Litchfield, Connecticut. He was holding a small toy sailor in his hand, a toy he had carried since his years in the Navy. He died by suicide. It was not until 32 years later, in the year 2000, that the United States Congress passed a resolution. President Bill Clinton signed it into law. It stated, officially and for the record, that Captain Charles McVay III bore no responsibility for the loss of the USS Indianapolis. Exoneration, 55 years after the sinking, 32 years after his death. In 2017, the wreck of the USS Indianapolis was finally located. She lies 18,000 feet beneath the surface of the Philippine Sea, 5.5 kilometers down, in total and permanent darkness. 879 men went with her. There is one more thing worth knowing. The sharks that circled those 900 men in the Philippine Sea, the oceanic whitetip, were, in 1945, considered among the most abundant large animals on Earth. Jacques Cousteau himself called them the most dangerous of all sharks. Today, the oceanic whitetip has lost up to 95% of its population across the Pacific. It is listed as critically endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. The apex predator of the Indianapolis disaster is itself disappearing, not because of radiation, not because of mutations, because of us. Some things that once seemed invincible, armies, navies, the creatures of the deep, turn out to be far more fragile than we ever imagined. We like to think of history as chaos, as a series of accidents no one could have predicted or prevented. But the USS Indianapolis is not that kind of story. The warnings existed, the gaps were visible, the failures were institutional, systematic, and then deliberately buried beneath the name of one man who had already survived the unsurvivable. Today, the names of all 1,195 crew members are inscribed on a memorial in Indianapolis, Indiana. The ship's bell, recovered from the wreck, is displayed in the Indiana War Memorial Museum. And somewhere in the Philippine Sea, 5.5 kilometers beneath the waves, what remains of the Indianapolis still rests exactly where she came to rest on the morning of July 30th, 1945. Some silences are not peace. Some silences are just the weight of everything that should have been said.